Hi, I'm Peter Jones. This is a love story. Emily Morton swung herself up onto the cabin roof and stood gazing over the ocean. How could the sea be such a deep, beautiful blue, yet was also so clear? On a sudden impulse, she slipped her t-shirt over her head and pulled off her shorts and underclothes. Naked, she dove over the rail into the clear, pellucid water. She went down deep and then angled her hands and arms upward and kicked her feet. As she surfaced, she shook her head and took a deep breath, loving the smell of the sea and the sound of the seagulls circling overhead. This was living. She turned on her back and floated lazily until suddenly she noticed a dark shape heading towards her. Looking at the yacht, she saw that Ken wasn't facing her way. "Help!" she yelled. "Hang on," called her husband as he turned and looked over the lower rail. "I'll just finish my drink and I'll be with you." He smiled as he saw Charlie, who was now swimming alongside his wife. Charlie was a huge groper fish that quite often met boats visiting this reef. He was one of the reasons that Emily loved coming here. Emily and Kenneth Morton were rich, although she was vague on where the money had come from. She never thought about that. Together they had travelled the world, although they seemed to return to the Queensland reefs and islands more than anywhere else. For two people in love, this was an idyllic life, and then Emily and Ken were in love. Emily knew that no two people had ever been in love as they were before. The days were spent doing whatever they wanted, whether it was lazing on a tropical beach, or shopping at Harrods in London, or the Galeries Lafayette in Paris. And the nights, oh yes, the nights. Following a meal at one of the best restaurants at whatever exotic port they were in, they retired to their own apartment. And then the night began. The most ardent incubus could not have hoped to compete with her lover, her husband, her beloved Ken. Emily sighed happily as she swam beside the groper and felt the huge fish nudging her and shaking her. She opened her eyes and looked without recognition at the face looking down at her. "Come on, Emily," the nurse said gently. "Wake up. Come on, time for your wash before breakfast. Your husband will be here soon." Ken arrived at 10 o'clock, as he did every day and had been doing for the past 5 years. He was a shabbily dressed, rather small man with a pot belly and wispy grey hair. He looked down at the emaciated old woman who was lying on the bed staring at him blankly, and placed a small bag of grapes on her bedside table. "I know you like these, my love," he murmured. He turned to the doctor beside him. I heard of a new drug on the radio this morning. Is there any chance..." His voice tailed off. He knew the answer. "I'm sorry. New drugs may help those in the early stages, but there's no cure for dementia, not when it's so far advanced." "Oh, it's not fair," said Ken. "She's had such a rotten life. We've never been well off, and she was in a wheelchair for 40 years, you know." The doctor nodded sympathetically. "Well, I couldn't earn anything, you see. I had to care for her. Is there any chance she'll ever recognise me again, any at all?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Morton, but she has no memory whatsoever of who you are or anything else that matter, and I'm afraid she never will. All she seems to want now is to sleep. She sleeps 12 to 14 hours a day." Ken thanked the doctor and bent down to kiss his wife before he left, but her eyes were already shut. Strangely, she seemed to be smiling.